Well, I think that it's complicated. Um, you have to remember that Jews are a very small minority within the population. And there's some parts in the United States that really don't have a Jewish population. So conceivably, one could go through one's life and not know Jewish people. So I think in those contexts that it's probable that some people wouldn't know about the Holocaust because it hadn't been integrated into their educational system. So that's part of the issue. And the other issue is really tied to memory.
Mm.
And memory is so important. I mean, if there's anything that I can stress to you here today, um, you have to keep memory of historical events alive. In fact, there's even a Jewish Hasidic saying that goes, forgetfulness leads to exile and memory leads to redemption. And that was something that the great Holocaust scholar Elie Wiesel would say over and over and over again. So, the further you get away from any event, the fewer people remember it. And unfortunately, that happens in cultures over time. I mean, ask your kids how much they know about, ask a young person how much they know about their great grandparents' life. The further you move in time, the further the easier it is for things to be forgotten. And that's why Holocaust education is so important, because it's the nature of humans to forget over time. And so we have to consciously work on our memory, consciously decide that we're going to remember these events and that we're going to include them in our teaching curriculum so that that knowledge, you won't end up with those terrible statistics, which are so troubling. When it's the Anti-Defamation League, I believe that keeps those statistics, and they're just really, really troubling.
Mm. And to your point about memory, someone made this point to me a few years ago that kind of now, like maybe my generation is the last one that has survivors of the Holocaust that can still
Mhm.
speak about it. It's going to be kind of a different world when they're all gone.
Right. And because it's a different world, that's why the educational factor is so important, because then the only memory you can give is the knowledge of the study that comes from the educational system. So Elie Wiesel used to say things like, to listen to a witness makes you a witness. And Holocaust programs throughout the country have worked so hard to record Holocaust survivors, to even create sophisticated technology now. There's a program out of the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Texas that actually has recorded, filmed Holocaust scholars, and through a variety of techniques, those images are preserved over time so that one can have these encounters. But it's just really very important. When I first started teaching, back in 2013, I developed a study abroad class to France and to Poland, and we traced the trajectory of what happened to Jews in France during the Holocaust. And I've run a number of study abroads just to Poland to study the Holocaust. The first one I taught was one of the first in the nation for study abroad courses to sites of destruction. And now most schools offer those kinds of educational experiences. But when I first started teaching these courses in Paris, I would take my students to meet Holocaust survivors, and they would talk to them. And those were very powerful sessions. And unfortunately, of all those Holocaust survivors I knew in 2013, there's only one who's still alive, and he's nearly 100.
Wow.
I have another friend that lives in Washington, D.C., who's a survivor. He was a baby. He was born in 1941. So it's that generation that is getting much older, those survivors who were actually born during the Holocaust.
Mhm.
So I really think my point is educators have to work even harder now And let me tell you about something I really want to promote here. If you could work this in, I think it would be really wonderful. In Tidewater, we have a fantastic organization, the Holocaust Commission of the United Jewish Federation, right? The Holocaust Commission of the United Jewish Federation of Tidewater is what it's called, based in Virginia Beach. And they have developed a number of programs to work with teachers in the area. They run a Elie Wiesel essay and visual arts competition every year, and they put on an educators conference in the summertime. And they've just done so much to promote Holocaust education in this particular area. Back in the 80s, that commission published a book called To Life. And the book recounted the biographies of Holocaust survivors from our area who told their stories. And the commission just yesterday sent a revised version to press. So they're going to put out a revised version very soon. It's updated stories about these Holocaust survivors from Tidewater, and they're putting together with it educational materials that K through 12 teachers, largely middle school and high school teachers, can use in their classrooms in Tidewater, connecting students from Hampton Roads to the stories of survivors that lived here in Hampton Roads. What can we do better? Is to educate more teachers on the college level who are ready to go into the classroom and incorporate the history of anti-Semitism and the history of the Holocaust into their daily, into the lesson plans that they're making. I know that many of my students that I've taken to Poland and taken them to these sites of atrocity are now teaching, here in Norfolk Public School System, in Virginia Beach. Some have been in Chesapeake and Suffolk. I don't believe I've taught anyone that's gone into the Portsmouth system. The private schools in the area have some robust Holocaust education, but so often it depends on the teacher, how much the teacher has had in their background. So I think that I think a really important component would be making sure Holocaust education is well funded in the universities, in the colleges and universities in the state. I mean, here at ODU, we have a center for Jewish studies, an Institute for Jewish Studies and Interfaith Understanding, IJIU. And through that center, we were able to create a minor in Holocaust and Genocide Studies.
Wow.
Right? So we have that. People can graduate from ODU, and on their transcript, they can have this minor in Holocaust and Genocide Studies. And that assures me that as teachers, assuming their degrees in education and they're going to teach, that they're well prepared to do that. But not all educators are going to pursue that on the college or university curriculum. Mm-hmm. So, having that be a part of what educators need to take and making sure those programs are well funded in colleges and universities in the Commonwealth of Virginia would be one way of ensuring that K through 12, and really we're talking middle school and high school, that the Holocaust education isn't just in the curriculum, but teachers are well trained in how to teach that subject. Mm-hmm. I think students have different experiences of it. And in my life work, this is the thing that I'm most proud of, that I developed these courses. And to date, I've taken about 88 students to Poland. And, students have different reactions. Mm. There's a student I had named Sarah Albright, who teaches now in Virginia Beach, social studies. And I remember we were walking across a former internment camp. We were literally tracking the landscape. And what most impressed her is what was done to the children. I mean, when you study the Holocaust, what you have to understand is that you're exploring human behavior.
Mm.
And human behavior, you're talking about humans that were ready to shoot and kill young children. So that's a powerful message. You know, I'm a human. I think of myself as a good person. These Germans and collaborators must have as well. And yet they engaged in these atrocious behaviors so that they could kill even little babies, you know? So I had another student that went with me named Jackson Blasham, and he's at Top Gun now, right? He's a jet pilot for the Navy.
That's wild.
And I'll never forget, his wife went with, they weren't married yet, but his now wife went on that trip too, and she's a social studies teacher. But Jackson's reaction to being at Auschwitz-Birkenau, it made him angry. He was mad. And I thought to myself, I want my American jet pilot, Navy pilot, to be mad at this kind of atrocity. That's what I want to see. So the reactions are different, but it's important to go there. I mean, the Navy sends their cadets. There's a program at Birkenau for a 2-week program where the Navy works with the Auschwitz Jewish Center and sends cadets there. Air Force does as well. A lot of police divisions around the world, because so many of the German officers that shot Jews were police officers before the war. A lot of police organizations send recruits and policemen to Auschwitz-Birkenau to study what happened, in that people began to be susceptible to an authoritarian regime, and they were receptive to the dialogue that was put out that dehumanized other parts of the population. So the one good thing about the many good things about Holocaust education, one of the important components is that you make students sensitive to the message that they're viewing. The Nazis were great at dissimilating. They were great at calling resettlement was actually deportation to death. And so they would constantly create language that didn't sound so bad for really horrible acts. And we would call that now fake news. So the thing about Holocaust education is that students can become more critical of what they're being told. They can become more critical of actions, and they especially can become more critical of language. It makes them much better critical thinkers, I think.
So when we talk about the way that America sort of matters in the Holocaust or in that time period, it's kind of the story of we joined in World War II, we helped beat the Nazis, and that was it. But there has always, to a degree, been an undercurrent of anti-Semitism and a lot of other things sort of associated with that in American culture. Do you think that there are things that we need to teach about that?
Well, I think it's important in what I've said already, that Holocaust education in the state already exists. Teaching about anti-Semitism would be something new, right? And that would involve a greater knowledge of the longevity of Jewish hatred. Anti-Semitism is really a novel term. It wasn't coined until 1879, and it's tied to racial hatred, right? So you have to get to a point in time where race is understood, right? Before 1879, what you're really talking about is anti-Judaism or anti-Jewishness. And that grows out of religious intolerance, and religious intolerance still exists in societies around the world. So teaching about anti-Semitism is complicated. And when you say anti-Semitism still exists within American society, when you look at the hate groups, really, that promote anti-Semitism, they come at it from a lot of different angles.
Mm.
You know, what motivates people to hate? It could be various different aspects of their background. So I think that Judaism or anti-Semitism is often called the longest hatred for very good reasons, because you can go back centuries and centuries and centuries and see it. I wouldn't call that anti-Semitism. I would call that anti-Judaism, but anti-Judaism undergirds what becomes anti-Semitism in the 19th century, and then is so revealed in the 20th century in the Holocaust.
Mm.
So, for example, if you go back in time, you can discuss, during the first onset of bubonic plague. An example I often give my students is that in 1349, the city of Strasbourg, in what is now France, killed all of their Jews as a prophylactic measure against plague. Plague hadn't come to the city, but they thought it would please God and that they wouldn't get plague if they did this.
Mm.
So there's this, there's just long, ugly, nasty history of violence against Jews. Some of it's religiously motivated. In the 20th century, it's racially motivated, but it's complicated, and it's hard to decipher at times what are what the multiple origins of hatred happen to be. And so therefore I think anything we can do to identify it and to teach students how to identify it helps us really to remember what's happened in the past, and so that we can better prepare students, I think, to understand what they're seeing and they're hearing.
Mm. But especially after the Holocaust, it's still, anti-Semitism still seems like one of the stronger things that we see in sort of the fringes of American society. And I guess that's not a question, but it's just very frustrating.
It's frustrating for me as a scholar, because I think, going back to an early question that you asked me here today, is that I find in speaking with people that they often don't know about anti-Semitism. They've heard about it, but they don't really know that much about it. So they are against racism,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't necessarily really understand where anti-Semitism fits into the history of racism and racial violence in our nation or abroad, wherever.
Mm-hmm.
So, unfortunately, the human race is one that differentiates. It's, we are and you are not. And that seems to be a human behavioral experience that goes back into the far expanses of time. And we haven't changed it. If anything, we seem to be incapable of diminishing it. And so it's that, I can't answer the why. I'm a professor of history, but if I could answer the why, I'd be an award-winning bestseller or something like that. I can't do that. I can only tell you that in my own life as a scholar, even as a child, trying to understand hate has always been something that fascinated me. And the only thing I know to do about it is to use education to create courage in people, because, I mean, it sounds so cliche to say some of these things, but I'm sure you've heard so often that the Holocaust or any kind of genocide is only possible because so many people do nothing about it, right? They're not necessarily the ones shooting or killing, but they turn a blind eye. They just don't care. And so I think Holocaust education is so important because I've seen this happen with young students. I'm part of this Elie Wiesel essay competition, and I read this in these essays from these high schoolers and sometimes middle schoolers, is that they have to be confronted with the idea that they must be courageous, right? If you don't know anything about anti-Semitism, then you may not question the racism around you or the prejudice against other groups that aren't Jewish, but other groups. African Americans, the LGBTQ community, immigrant groups. But if you're confronted with Holocaust education, then maybe that causes you to think more broadly when you see anybody being discriminated against, anybody being bullied, hit, abused in any kind of way, because it takes real courage. Especially, schools are difficult, especially for young children. And so to be able to have the courage to stand up and say, that's not how I'm going to conduct my own life. That's not how what I'm going to tolerate and put up with in this class or in these hallways or on this ball field or whatever it is. And to carry that through. So getting kids educated about courageous behavior early on, and then providing universities and colleges with the means to educate young scholars, maybe they're not all young, scholars who are going into the teaching profession, who are going out into the world, who may be in the military, who may be in the criminal justice system, who may be just living their daily lives and encounter the horrors of racism and anti-Semitism. Maybe then they'll be better prepared to stand up against it.